The research station floated in the cold darkness of space, orbiting the massive gas giant called Kethris 7. For 3 cycles, everything had been peaceful. Scientists from 12 different species worked together, studying the strange clouds and storms of the giant planet below. Among them were 12 humans from Earth's colonial expansion program. Dr. Katie Morrison stood at her workstation, examining samples of atmospheric gases. She was a xenobiologist, a scientist who studied alien life forms. At 34 years old, she had spent half her life preparing for this moment. Being here, working alongside alien species, was everything she had dreamed of since childhood. "Katie, come look at this," called her assistant, a young man named Greg Holloway. He was pointing at something on his screen, but Katie never made it to his station. The explosion threw her across the room. Alarms screamed through the corridors. Red emergency lights began to flash. Katie pulled herself up from the floor, her ears ringing, her hands shaking. "What happened?" She shouted "Doc" before anyone could answer. The station shook again. Then again. Through the observation window, Katie saw ships. Dozens of ships, dark and angular, surrounding the station like wolves circling wounded prey. Ambassador Torvan, a tall insectoid diplomat from the Galactic Concord, stumbled into the laboratory. His compound eyes were wide with fear. His thin limbs trembled. "The Kreth Dominion," he said, his voice filled with terror. "They have found us." Katie had heard stories about the Kreth. Every species in the galaxy had heard stories. The Kreth were raiders, slavers, and conquerors. They had destroyed 17 civilizations. They took what they wanted and killed anyone who resisted. "Everyone, follow me," Katie said, trying to keep her voice calm. "We need to get to the emergency shelter." She gathered the human scientists and began moving through the corridors. Smoke filled the air. Sparks flew from damaged panels. The sound of gunfire echoed from somewhere deeper in the station. Greg stayed close to her side. His face was pale, but he kept moving. Behind them came Dr. Linda Vance, the team's geologist. Her arm was bleeding, but she did not complain. Next came the others. Marcus, the engineer. Tony, the pilot. Wendy, the medical officer. All 12 humans moved together, protecting each other, just as humans had always done. They reached the communication center just as another explosion rocked the station. Katie knew they could not escape. The Kreth ships had them surrounded. But maybe, just maybe, she could call for help. "Is the emergency beacon still working?" she asked Marcus. He checked the controls, his fingers moving quickly. "Yes, the main transmitter is damaged, but the old backup system still has power." The old backup system. It used an ancient human frequency, one that most alien species considered outdated and useless. But Katie knew that somewhere out there, human ships were listening. She activated the beacon and spoke into the microphone. Her voice was steady, even though her heart was pounding. "This is Dr. Katie Morrison of the Kethris 7 research station. We are under attack by the Kreth Dominion. 12 human civilians are trapped here. Please send help. I repeat, please send help." She attached the station's coordinates and transmitted the message. The signal burst through subspace, traveling faster than light, racing across the stars. The door to the communication center exploded inward. Kreth soldiers poured into the room. They were massive creatures, standing over 2 meters tall, covered in thick gray scales. Their eyes glowed red in the emergency lights. They carried weapons that hummed with deadly energy. The lead soldier stepped forward. His name was Commander Vorax, and he wore the golden symbols of high rank on his armor. He looked at the humans with amusement, the way a predator looks at trapped prey. "What do we have here?" he said, his voice deep and cruel. Little humans, far from their home world. Katie stood her ground. She did not run. She did not beg. She looked directly into the commander's glowing eyes. "You are making a mistake," she said quietly. Varax laughed. It was an ugly sound, like rocks grinding together. "A mistake? Little creature, do you know who we are? We have conquered 17 species. We have destroyed empires. What can your kind possibly do to us?" One of the Kreth soldiers pointed at the communication panel. "Commander, she sent a transmission. A distress signal." Varax walked slowly to the panel and examined it. He saw the human frequency, the simple message, the coordinates. He laughed again. "You called for help? From who? Your people are new to the galaxy. You have no great fleet. You have no powerful weapons. You are soft, weak creatures from a small, unimportant world." He turned back to Katie. "No one is coming to save you." Katie said nothing. But deep inside, she knew something that Varax did not know. She knew the truth about her species. Humans came from Earth, a planet that the Galactic Concord had classified as a Class 12 death world. That classification meant something. It meant that Earth was a planet of extremes, a world of deadly predators, violent weather, and constant struggle. Everything on Earth was designed to kill. And yet, against all odds, humans had survived. They had survived ice ages that covered their world in frozen death. They had survived plagues that killed millions. They had survived predators with claws and fangs and venom. They had even survived each other with all their wars and conflicts. But more than surviving, they had learned something important. They had learned that the only way to survive a hostile universe was together. They had learned to protect their own. They had learned that the pack was everything. Ambassador Torvon watched as the Kreth soldiers forced the humans to their knees. He felt shame and sadness. These humans had been kind to him. They had shared their food, their laughter, their strange but wonderful stories. And now they would die here, far from their home. But then Torvon noticed something strange. The humans were not crying. They were not begging for mercy. Instead, they looked at each other with quiet determination. They held hands. They whispered words of comfort. And Katie Morrison, despite everything, smiled. "You have made a terrible mistake, Commander," she said again. "You think we are alone. You think no one cares about 12 small humans on a distant station." She shook her head slowly. "You are wrong. Our people will come. They always come. And when they arrive, you will learn why the galaxy calls us Deathworlders." Varax struck her across the face. Katie fell to the ground, blood running from her lip. But even then, she did not stop smiling, because somewhere in the vast darkness of space, the signal was already being received, and humanity was about to answer. 600 light-years away from the captured research station, the battleship USS Relentless moved through the quiet emptiness of space. It was the flagship of Earth's 3rd Defense Fleet, a massive vessel carrying over 2,000 crew members. Its hull was painted dark gray, and its weapons were always ready. On the bridge, Admiral Danny Cortez sat in his command chair, reviewing reports from the outer colonies. He was 53 years old, with gray hair cut short and deep lines on his weathered face. He had served in the fleet for 30 years. He had fought in wars, saved lives, and lost friends. He understood the weight of command. Lieutenant Commander Beth Navarro approached him with a datapad in her hand. She was his tactical officer, a sharp-minded woman in her late 30s who never missed a detail. "Admiral," she said, her voice tight with concern, "we have received an emergency transmission." Cortez took the datapad and read the message. His face remained calm, but something changed in his eyes. Something cold and dangerous. "The Kreth Dominion," he said quietly. "Yes, sir." "They have attacked the Kethra 7 research station. 12 human civilians are trapped there." Cortez read the message again. He saw the name at the bottom. Dr. Katie Morrison. He did not know her. He had never met her. But she was human, and she was calling for help. That was all that mattered. What forces do the Kreth have in that system? He asked. Beth checked her data. Long-range scans indicate 47 warships, sir. They have established a complete blockade around the station. 47 ships. That was a significant force. The Kreth were not playing games. They had come in strength, expecting no resistance. Cortez stood up from his chair. He walked to the main view screen and looked out at the stars. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he turned to his communications officer. "Open a fleet-wide channel," he ordered. "All ships." The officer nodded and activated the communication system. Throughout the fleet, on 93 different vessels, crew members stopped what they were doing and listened. "This is Admiral Danny Cortez speaking to all ships of the 3rd Defense Fleet," he began. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of absolute authority. "We have received a distress signal from the Kethra 7 research station. The Kreth Dominion has attacked, and 12 of our people are in danger." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I know what some of you might be thinking. 12 people is a small number. The enemy has 47 warships. The distance is 600 light years. Some might say the cost is too high. Some might say we should wait for reinforcements, for orders from high command, for a better plan." His voice grew harder. "But I say this, we do not leave our people behind. Ever. Not one. Not 12. Not 1,000. When someone calls for help, we answer. That is who we are. That is what makes us human." Across the fleet, crew members felt their hearts beat faster. They stood taller. They gripped their weapons and their controls with renewed purpose. "The Kreth think we are weak," Cortez continued. "They think we are soft. They think we will be too afraid to fight. They have forgotten something important. They have forgotten that we come from Earth, a world that tried to kill us every single day for 4 billion years. We survived ice. We survived fire. We survived predators and plagues and disasters of every kind. And we did not survive by hiding. We survived by fighting. Together." He raised his fist. "All ships, prepare for immediate jump to hyperspace. We will arrive at Kethris 7 in 6 hours. We will engage the enemy. We will rescue our people. And we will remind the galaxy why they call us Deathworlders." The fleet exploded into action. Engineers powered up the jump drives. Weapons officers loaded ammunition. Pilots ran to their fighters. Medical teams prepared for casualties. Everyone had a job, and everyone did it without hesitation. In the engine room of the Relentless, Chief Engineer Sam Torres wiped sweat from his forehead as he pushed the reactor to maximum power. He had worked on this ship for 15 years. He knew every system, every wire, every piece of metal. And he knew that today, everything had to work perfectly. On the carrier USS Thunderhawk, fighter pilots climbed into their cockpits. Squadron leader Amy Chun, call sign Razor, checked her weapons one final time. She had flown 63 combat missions. She had never lost a wingman. She was not planning to start today. On the destroyer USS Vigilant, Captain Mike Santos gathered his crew on the main deck. They were young, many of them on their first deployment. He looked at their faces and saw fear, excitement, and determination all mixed together. "Listen to me," he said. "Out there, 12 civilians are waiting for us. They are scared. They are hurt. They are hoping that someone will come to save them. We are that someone. We are their hope. And we will not let them down." The crew cheered. Across the fleet, similar scenes played out on every ship. Officers and enlisted personnel, veterans and newcomers, all of them united by a single purpose. They were going to save their own dot in the intelligence center of the Galactic Concord. Analysts watched the human fleet with growing disbelief. Seelith, a young Valori analyst with bright blue eyes and delicate antennae, stared at her screen in confusion. "This cannot be right," she said to her supervisor. An elderly Morvan named Coordinator Hessick. "What is it?" he asked, floating closer on his anti-gravity chair. "The humans. They are mobilizing their entire defense fleet for a rescue operation." Hessick studied the data. "How many ships?" 93 warships, sir, including their flagship Dreadnought." Hessick was silent for a long moment. In his 200 years of service, he had never seen anything like this. Most species would negotiate for hostages. Some would pay ransom. A few might send a small strike team. But a full fleet? For 12 civilians? "Perhaps we are missing something," he said finally. "Perhaps these 12 humans are important. Leaders or scientists of great value." Seelith shook her head. "No, sir. They are ordinary researchers. Nothing special about them. Then why? Why would the humans risk so much?" Seelith had no answer. But deep down, she felt a strange emotion that she did not recognize. It took her a moment to understand what it was. It was admiration. 6 hours later, the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace near Kethra 7. 93 warships arranged themselves in perfect battle formation, their weapons charging, their shields glowing. On the bridge of the Relentless, Admiral Cortez looked at the Kreth fleet on his view screen. 47 ships, just as intelligence had predicted. They were large and powerful, covered in weapons and armor. But Cortez did not feel fear. He felt only cold, patient anger. "All ships," he said quietly. "Weapons free. Engage the enemy. Rescue our people." The battle for Kethra 7 had begun. The medical bay of the USS Relentless was filled with wounded soldiers and rescued civilians. Doctors and nurses moved between patients, treating injuries and offering comfort. The smell of medicine and burnt metal hung in the air. Katie sat on a medical bed while a nurse cleaned the cut on her lip. Around her, the other human scientists were being examined. Greg had a broken arm. Linda needed stitches on her shoulder. Tony had a concussion. But they were alive. All 12 of them were alive. Ambassador Torvan stood in the corner of the medical bay, watching everything with his large compound eyes. He had never seen anything like this before. The humans around him were exhausted, injured, and grieving for their fallen soldiers. Yet somehow, they also seemed proud. Happy, even. A young Marine walked past, his arm in a sling. He noticed Torvan and stopped. "You okay, Ambassador?" The Marine asked. "Do you need anything?" Torvan shook his head slowly. "I am unharmed, thank you. I was simply observing." The Marine nodded and continued on his way, as if helping an alien diplomat was the most normal thing in the world. Admiral Cortez entered the medical bay a few hours later. He had spent the time since the battle directing rescue operations, recovering escape pods, and counting the dead. 214 human lives lost. Each one was a name he would have to memorize, a letter he would have to write, a family he would have to notify. But first, he wanted to see the people they had saved. He found Katie sitting alone, staring out a small window at the stars. The gas giant Kethra 7 glowed softly in the distance, its clouds swirling in endless storms. "Dr. Morrison?" he said gently. Katie turned to look at him. She recognized the rank symbols on his uniform. "Admiral Cortez, I do not know what to say. Thank you seems too small." Cortez sat down beside her. "There is no need for thanks, Doctor. You called. We answered. That is simply what we do." Katie was quiet for a moment. 214 people died coming to save us. 12 lives for 214. That cannot be right. That cannot be fair. Cortez looked at her with understanding in his eyes. Dr. Morrison, let me tell you something. Every person in this fleet volunteered for this mission. Every single one. They knew the risks. They knew some of them would not come home. And they came anyway. But why? Katie asked. Why would they die for strangers? Cortez considered the question carefully before answering. Because that is what makes us human. We protect each other. Not because it is logical. Not because it is efficient. But because it is right. Because every human life matters. Because we refuse to live in a universe where we abandon our own to suffer and die alone. Tears rolled down Katie's cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed. I am sorry, she said. I should be stronger. You are strong, Cortez replied. You survived. You kept your people together. You sent the signal that saved all of your lives. That took courage. He stood up and placed a hand on her shoulder. Rest now, Doctor. We will have you home soon. As Cortez left the medical bay, he found Ambassador Torvan waiting for him in the corridor. The Valori diplomat looked troubled, his antennae twitching nervously. Admiral, Torvan said, may I speak with you? Cortez nodded. Of course, Ambassador. Walk with me. They moved through the corridors of the Relentless together. Around them, crew members worked to repair damage and care for the wounded. The ship felt tired but proud. I have been observing your people, Torvan began. I have been trying to understand what I witnessed today. I must confess, Admiral, I am having difficulty. What troubles you? You came for 12 people, Torvan said. 12 ordinary researchers. You brought 93 warships. You fought a battle that cost hundreds of lives. You risked everything. He stopped walking and looked at Cortez directly. My government would never do such a thing. No government in the Galactic Concord would do such a thing. The cost is too high. The logic is wrong. Cortez smiled slightly. Ambassador, you are right. The logic is wrong. By any rational calculation, what we did today makes no sense. We should have negotiated. We should have paid ransom. We should have waited for a better opportunity. Then why did you not? Because we are not purely rational creatures, Cortez replied. We are humans. We evolved on a world that was trying to kill us every moment of every day. We survived by sticking together, by protecting our tribe, by never abandoning those who needed us. He resumed walking, and Torvan followed. When I was young, Cortez continued, my grandmother told me a story. She said that long ago, on ancient Earth, our ancestors lived in small groups on dangerous plains filled with predators. They had no claws, no fangs, no armor. They were weak compared to the beasts that hunted them. But they had something else. They had each other. They knew that if one of them was hurt, the others would carry them. If one of them was lost, the others would search for them. If one of them was in danger, the others would fight for them. He stopped at a window and looked out at the stars. That instinct, that bond, is written deep in our nature. It is who we are. When Dr. Morrison sent her signal, she was calling out to her tribe. And her tribe answered. Not because it was smart, not because it was safe, but because that is what tribes do. Torvan was silent for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised Cortez. I envy you, Admiral. Cortez raised an eyebrow. Envy? Why? My species lives for 300 years. We have colonized dozens of worlds. We have achieved great things in art and science and philosophy. But we have never had what you have. We have never had that connection, that willingness to die for each other, that loyalty that goes beyond logic. He touched his chest with a thin, trembling hand. When the Kreth attacked the station, my first thought was to save myself. I looked for a place to hide. I calculated my chances of survival. I thought of ways to negotiate, to bargain, to surrender. His voice grew quiet with shame. But your Dr. Morrison? Her first thought was to warn her people, to call for help, not for herself, but for others, even when she had no reason to believe help would come. Cortez put his hand on the ambassador's shoulder. That is not something to feel shame about, Ambassador. Your instincts are different from ours. That does not make them wrong. It just makes them different. Perhaps, Torvan replied. But I think I understand now why the galaxy fears your kind. Fears us? Yes, not because you are violent, though you can be. Not because you are powerful, though you are growing stronger every day. But because you are loyal, because you will not stop, because you will never give up on your own. His compound eyes met Cortez's gaze. The Kreth thought they were taking hostages. They thought they were gaining leverage. Instead, they awakened something terrible. They awakened the fury of a species that would cross 600 light years and sacrifice hundreds of lives for 12 strangers. Torvan shook his head slowly. No wonder they call you Deathworlders. You are not just creatures who survived a deadly planet. You are creatures who carry that deadliness inside you, that refusal to accept defeat, that unstoppable determination. And you use it not for conquest, but for protection. That is terrifying, Admiral. And it is beautiful. Cortez did not know what to say. He had never thought of humanity in those terms. To him, they had simply done what needed to be done. But perhaps that was exactly Torvan's point. Somewhere across the galaxy, word of the battle was spreading. Species that had dismissed humanity as newcomers were suddenly paying attention. The Kreth Dominion was withdrawing from 3 contested systems. The Galactic Concord was discussing a formal alliance with Earth, and in 100 alien capitals, leaders asked themselves the same question. What kind of species sends 93 warships to save 12 civilians? The answer was simple: humans. The sky tore open with light, and hope came screaming through. Admiral Lisa Monroe stood on the bridge of the USS Sentinel as her second fleet dropped out of hyperspace directly behind the Keth formation. 18 fresh warships, their weapons fully charged, their crews hungry for battle. All ships fire at will, she ordered. The Keth fleet, caught between 2 human forces, erupted in chaos. War leader Keseth watched in horror as his rear guard was torn apart by the newcomers. Ships that had been moments from victory now found themselves fighting for survival. Commander Cole felt his heart surge with relief as he saw the second fleet's markers appear on his tactical display. All units, push forward. They're trapped between us. Show them what happens when you threaten our friends. The battle turned in an instant. The Keth, outnumbered now and surrounded, began to falter. Their formation broke as captains tried to find a way to escape the trap. But Keseth was not finished. He had not conquered 12 worlds by giving up when things became difficult. If he could not win in space, he would win on the ground. Launch the dropships, he ordered. All assault troops to the surface. Take the capital. Kill their leaders. Hundreds of Keth dropships fell toward Ashara Prime like burning meteors. The human fleet tried to stop them, but too many slipped through the defensive fire. They crashed into the streets of the capital city, and Keth soldiers poured out, weapons blazing. The Volari had no army. They had city guards who carried ceremonial weapons and had never seen real combat. Against the hardened Keth shock troops, they fell like grass before a storm. Captain Cruz heard the reports coming in from the surface and made his decision immediately. All available Marine units, prepare for combat drop. We're going down there. Lieutenant Kevin Drake was already suiting up when Cruz reached the hangar bay. The big Marine was checking his rifle with calm, practiced movements. Around him, 50 other Marines were doing the same. Lieutenant, Cruz said, Elder Morvith and the Council are trapped in the government building. A large Keth force is moving toward them. You need to get there first. Drake nodded. We'll get it done, sir. The Marine dropship fell through the atmosphere, shaking violently as anti-aircraft fire exploded around it. Drake held on tight and thought about the mission. He had been a soldier for 15 years. He had fought on a dozen worlds against a dozen enemies. But he had never fought for anything that felt as important as this. These Valari had never asked for war. They had spent their lives healing others. They did not deserve what was happening to them. The dropship hit the ground hard, and the doors blew open. Drake was the first one out, his boots hitting the broken street as he scanned for threats. The capital city was burning. Smoke filled the air. Somewhere nearby, he could hear weapons fire and screaming. Move out, he ordered. Stay tight. Watch the rooftops. They ran through the ruined streets toward the government building. Everywhere they looked, they saw destruction. Bodies lay in the gutters. Buildings had collapsed from weapons fire. The Keth were not here to conquer. They were here to destroy. Drake's squad reached the main plaza just as the Keth assault force was surrounding the government building. At least 200 enemy soldiers were setting up positions, preparing to storm the entrance where a handful of Valari guards were making their last stand. 50 against 200, one of Drake's Marines muttered. Great odds. Drake smiled grimly. I've had worse. Set up firing positions. We hit them hard and fast. No mercy. The Marines opened fire from behind the Keth lines. Their weapons were superior, their training was better, and they had the element of surprise. The first volley cut down 30 Keth soldiers before they even knew what was happening. The battle for the government building became a nightmare of close combat. The Keth outnumbered the Marines 4-1, but the humans refused to fall back. They fought from building to building, room to room, using every trick they knew to hold the enemy at bay. Drake himself killed 14 Keth soldiers in the first 10 minutes. He moved through the smoke like a ghost, appearing suddenly to strike down enemies before vanishing again. His Marines followed his example, fighting with a fury that shocked the Keth, but numbers told. The Marines began to fall. One by one, they went down, wounded or killed. Drake took a plasma burn across his shoulder that nearly dropped him. He gritted his teeth against the pain and kept fighting. Inside the government building, Elder Morvith and his council huddled in the central chamber. They could hear the fighting outside, getting closer with every passing minute. The Valari guards at the doors looked terrified. They knew they could not stop what was coming. Then the doors exploded inward, and Keth soldiers poured through. Morvith closed his eyes, ready for death. He had lived a long life. He had served his people well. If this was the end, he would face it with dignity. But death did not come. Instead, he heard human voices shouting and the roar of human weapons. He opened his eyes to see Lieutenant Drake standing in the doorway, his rifle blazing, his uniform torn and burned. Behind him, a handful of Marines fought with desperate courage against the Keth force. The fighting was brutal and brief. When it was over, 12 Keth soldiers lay dead in the council chamber. Drake stood over Morvith, bleeding from 3 wounds, swaying on his feet but refusing to fall. Are you hurt, sir? Drake asked. Morvith stared at the human soldier in amazement. You came for us. You came through all of that for us. Drake smiled through the pain. That's the job, sir. He collapsed a moment later, his strength finally giving out. The surviving Marines rushed to their lieutenant's side, applying medical aid with practiced hands. Outside, the tide was turning. Human reinforcements were landing across the city. The Keth assault force, cut off from their fleet and facing growing resistance, began to break. Some tried to flee. Some surrendered. Some fought to the death dot in orbit. Admiral Monroe's fleet was crushing what remained of the Keth Armada. War leader Kesseth, seeing his defeat was complete, tried to escape in his flagship. The USS Guardian cut him off and disabled his engines. Kesseth was captured alive. He would face justice for the plague he had created, and the millions he had murdered as the sun set over the capital city. Elder Morvith sat beside Lieutenant Drake in the makeshift hospital that had been set up in the council chamber. The human soldier was stable now, sleeping peacefully while his wounds healed. Morvith watched him breathe and wondered at the strange fate that had brought these humans to his world. They had asked for nothing. They had expected nothing. They had simply come because they heard a cry for help, and they had given everything to answer it. Morvith reached out and gently took the sleeping soldier's hand. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for everything." Outside, the stars were coming out, and human ships still circled in the sky, watching over the world they had saved. The silence was strange after so much noise. For days, the skies of Ashara Prime had been filled with fire and thunder. Now there was only the soft wind and the distant sound of reconstruction crews clearing the rubble. Elder Morvith walked through the capital city and saw his world changed forever. Buildings that had stood for 1,000 years were now ruins. Streets that had known only peace were scarred with the marks of battle. Everywhere he looked, he saw damage that would take generations to repair. But his people were alive. The plague was being cured. The Keth were gone. And for all of this, he had the humans to thank. The cost of the battle was enormous. Admiral Monroe's staff had given him the numbers, and each one felt like a knife in his heart. 14 human ships destroyed. Over 2,000 sailors dead. On the ground, nearly 300 Marines had given their lives defending a world they had never seen before. 2,000 lives. 2,000 families back on Earth who would never see their loved ones again. 2,000 futures erased so that the Valari could have a future of their own. Morvith did not know how to carry such a debt. He did not know if it could ever be repaid. The memorial service was held in the great plaza at the center of the capital. It was the same plaza where the fiercest fighting had occurred, where Lieutenant Drake and his Marines had held the line against impossible odds. The scars of battle were still visible on the surrounding buildings, but the plaza itself had been cleared and cleaned. Thousands of Valari gathered to pay their respects. They stood in silence as human honor guards carried the flags of the fallen. They watched as soldiers they had never met were remembered with words of love and grief. Captain Daniel Cruz stood at the front of the gathering with Admiral Lisa Monroe and the other surviving officers. His uniform was clean and pressed, but exhaustion showed in his eyes. He had not slept properly since the battle began. Commander Nathan Cole was not there. He had died on the third day of fighting, when his ship was destroyed covering the retreat of 2 damaged cruisers. His crew had survived because of his sacrifice. He had not. Admiral Monroe stepped forward to address the crowd. Her voice was steady, but those who knew her could hear the pain beneath the words. "We came here because we heard a cry for help," she said. "We did not know the Valari. We had no treaties with them. We had nothing to gain from fighting for them. But they needed help, and we answered." She paused and looked out at the sea of Valari faces. Many of them were crying. Many were holding the hands of children who had been saved from the plague. Children who were alive because human doctors had worked day and night to find a cure. 2,000 of our people will never go home, Monroe continued. They will never see their families again. They will never grow old. They gave their futures so that your people could have a future. This is not a debt we ask you to repay. This is a gift we give freely, because it is right. She stepped back, and the Valari orchestra began to play. The music was ancient and beautiful, a song of mourning that the Valari had sung for their dead for 10,000 years. But today, they sang it for humans. After the service, Elder Morvith found Lieutenant Drake standing alone at the edge of the plaza. The Marine was leaning on a crutch, his wounds still healing. His face was solemn as he watched the crowd slowly scatter. "Lieutenant," Morvith said, approaching him carefully, "you should be resting." Drake shook his head. "I wanted to see them. The ones I couldn't save." Morvith understood. He had felt the same way many times, losing patience when he was a young doctor, before he entered politics. The weight of failure never truly went away. "You saved my life," Morvith said. "You saved my entire council. You fought through an army to reach us." "I lost 12 good people getting there," Drake replied. 12 people who trusted me to bring them home." Morvith was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out and placed his hand on the Marine's shoulder. "I have lived for almost 200 years, he said. "I have seen many things. I have known many species. But I have never met anyone like your people. You fight for strangers. You die for those who can give you nothing in return. You carry the weight of your sacrifices with honor and with grief." He looked into Drake's eyes and spoke with absolute sincerity. "Your people are not just warriors. You are something much rarer. You are protectors. And my people will never forget what you have done for us." Drake met the old Valari's gaze. For a moment, the weight on his shoulders seemed to lighten just a little. "Thank you, sir," he said quietly. "That means a lot." In the days that followed, the Valari High Council voted unanimously to request a permanent alliance with the United Earth Federation. The motion passed without a single objection. Even those who had protested the human presence before the battle now spoke in favor of the alliance. The Galactic Coalition, which had ordered the humans to withdraw just days before, quietly approved the treaty. They had watched humanity fight and die for a world that had rejected their help. They had seen something they did not fully understand but could not deny. A reporter from the Coalition News Service approached Admiral Monroe as she was preparing to depart. Her fleet was gathering in orbit, ready for the long journey home. The wounded were loaded onto medical ships. The dead were carried in sealed containers that would take them back to Earth for burial. "Admiral," the reporter said, "the galaxy is asking questions about what happened here. Many species do not understand why humanity sacrificed so much for the Valari. Can you explain it?" Monroe looked at the reporter with tired eyes. She thought about all the words she could use, all the explanations she could give. She thought about history and politics and strategy, but in the end, she chose the simplest answer. "The Valari expected medical aid," she said. "We brought warships instead. Because sometimes the best medicine is making sure the patient lives long enough to heal." She turned and walked toward her shuttle. Behind her, the reporter stared in silence, trying to understand what he had just heard. On the surface of Ashara Prime, Elder Morvith watched the human fleet rise into the sky. The ships caught the light of the twin suns and glittered like stars ascending to the heavens. Children stood beside their parents and pointed at the departing vessels. These were children who had been dying just weeks ago, now healthy and whole because of human medicine. They waved goodbye to the strangers who had saved them. Morvith raised his own hand in farewell. "Goodbye, my friends," he whispered. "May you find peace. May you find joy. And may the galaxy one day understand what you have shown us today." The ships vanished into the darkness of space. The plaza fell quiet, and the Valari, who had never known war, began the long work of healing. They would build a monument in the plaza. They would write songs about the battle. They would tell stories to their children, and their children's children about the day the humans came. They expected medical aid. They received something far more precious, thought they. Received proof that somewhere in the cold darkness of the universe, there were those who would fight for strangers, die for strangers, and ask nothing in return. They received humanity,